So, what do we mean when we talk about being out of our comfort zones? Well, generally, I suppose it means being in unfamiliar territory, being in a position outside of your knowledge or understanding where you can't rely on things you know you're good at, or you are perhaps forced to rely on things you're not so good at. Well, with that in mind, what does being outside my comfort zone look like? Well, I would say having to do anything that requires focus or discipline, anything that requires me to be reflective or introspective, or anything that requires any degree of skill or technique. These are the things I consider outside of my own personal comfort zone. But why am I telling you this? Well, these are all the excuses I have made in the past for bouncing off journaling games. And I've tried. Okay, I own a lot of journaling games and I read them through and I sort of find myself nodding along thinking, hey, this is really cool, but I don't want to play this. I don't want to kind of make a big commitment. I don't want to have to write things down by hand with a pen like it's the olden days. I don't want to be reflective because that's disgusting. But, sometimes you find yourself so far outside of your comfort zone that you can't really remember how you got there in the first place. And this is why I find myself talking to you about Koriko, a magical year, a solo journaling game so good that it dragged me kicking and screaming out of my comfort zone. And I think I had an existential crisis whilst playing it. Koriko, A Magical Year, written by Jack Harrison, published by Mousehole Press, sees you taking on the role of a teenage witch as they leave their small rural hometown and head for the big city, the titular city of Koriko, where they must spend a year, the titular magical year, honing their craft and hopefully learning a little about themselves. Now, if this setup sounds familiar, it should. It is the exact premise of Kiki's Delivery Service, and Koriko cites that film and the book on which it is based as key influences right out of the gate. And look, it's a great setup with plenty of potential to explore a coming-of-age narrative and dig into what it feels like being an angsty teen living in an unfamiliar place, coming to terms with having magical powers. The game is structured into 7 volumes, each taking a few hours to complete. The first volume, Departure, introduces your witch and where they came from, then puts them on a broom and sends them off to the big city. This volume is pretty straightforward, with pick lists to help fill in your character details alongside the odd dice roll to provide some randomness to the prompts. You write journal entries based on these prompts, and then the volume ends as all volumes end, with the text instructing you to write a letter home to your mentor. But once you've left your hometown and your witch actually begins their year in Koriko, the game and its mechanics change to reflect the new, dynamic rhythms of city life. The game moves away from pick lists and dice rolls to prompts generated by a tarot deck, and you use these to play through 6 more volumes: Arrival, and then the seasons of the year, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, before the final volume, Year's End, when your witch must make a big decision. Do they return home with all the knowledge and experience they've gained during this magical year, or do they stay in Koriko and begin a new, altogether different life? You begin each of the city volumes by building a smaller, bespoke volume deck drawn from the cards of each tarot suit. The minor arcana are known as moments and represents the events you encounter, and each are themed depending on their suit. The major arcana represent your confidants, the various denizens of Koriko that you meet as you explore the city. After this volume deck is built, you take a deep breath, you start a new page and turn over your first card. You read the prompt and write your journal entry. Or so I thought. I've often been frustrated by the prompts in journaling games, especially when prompts that are designed for variety actually end up being wildly contradictory, causing your game and your story to lurch awkwardly between hard to connect occurrences and events, taking you on a narrative detour away from what previous prompts may have established as being important. But Koriko has levers for you to pull and dials for you to turn that change the way your character interacts with the prompts and alters their significance as they relate specifically to your witch's story. The moments themselves are evocative without going into too much detail, giving you plenty to work with and some additional inspiration. For example, the Four of Wands says, "You have begun to hoard something. What? Why do you tell yourself you need it?" A situation arises where sharing your hoard is the best solution to address a crisis. Can you choose to let go of it? Some interesting questions, and at the bottom of the card a few options to get the wheels turning. But once you've flipped a card and read the prompt, you must then refer to each volume's unique grid of twists. Twists are simple phrases that add an additional bit of spice. And let's return to the Four of Wands example where you've been hoarding something. Now, that prompt resolved with the twist spring cleaning will lead to a very different journal entry than resolving it with the twist better left buried. And the keen-eyed among you will have noticed the word risky under some of these twists. Well, that is yet another way in which Koriko plays with resolving prompts. Whenever you resolve a risky prompt or twist, you are asked to stack dice. Usually it's between 1 and 3 dice at a time, but as your witch becomes more skilled, you'll add fewer dice when prompted. The stack is persistent and carries over between volumes, and if the tower topples when you're trying to add dice, well, that's bad news. You leave the dice where they fall and count the most popular result, and that result gives you another prompt, a consequence prompt based around your failure. The moment sets it up. The twist adds depth or focus, and the dice stacking introduces tension, stakes, and consequence. A toppled dice stack can also give you additional penalties, such as having to add extra dice the next time you're asked to resolve a risky prompt, or adding special confidants to your circle. Hang on, sorry, I have overlooked the circle. I need to kind of rewind and tell you what the circle is. As I said before, the minor arcana are the moments in your story, and the major arcana represent your confidants, notable people you meet and build relationships with. Now, each confidant comes with their own prompts, 2 whole pages of prompts, in fact, and this is what helps bring them to life. The first time you draw a confidant, you generate the circumstances under which you met, you establish some details about what they do and how they present themselves. And this is in addition to marking a twist on your grid and, of course, generating a potential consequence. After you've written a journal entry based on these, the confidant is added to your circle, which is a separate deck that represents the rotating cast of characters in your story. When you build your deck at the start of each volume, in addition to adding moments from the various suits, you will be asked to add a varying number of confidants from your circle, and each time you draw a confidant, you resolve one of their unique hangout prompts, to which, of course, yes, you guessed it, you add twists and consequences. Your circle gives you a great deal of agency when setting up each volume deck. Do you want to add more confidants to prioritize exploring relationships, or do you want to add more moments and focus on exploring the city and the events happening around you? It's a very clever way to ensure constant surprise and discovery, whilst giving you opportunities to spend time with characters you meet along the way. So overall, that is sort of how the game works. But what happened in my game? Cooper is an artist, born, much to his frustration, into being a witch. He longs for the bright lights and big city of Koriko. He longs to shrug off the weight of expectation, the expectation that a witch must use their magical gifts to help people. Now, Cooper isn't bad. He understands that helping people is the right thing to do. But what's the point in being magical or having these abilities if you can't use them to create things, to make art and, dare I say it, have a little fun? To Cooper, Koriko represents freedom, it represents expression, it represents endless possibilities. However, pretty much as soon as he arrived in Koriko, Cooper was forced to reconsider his artistic aspirations. The very first card I turned over was the Knight of Swords, which says, "An occult society grows in popularity. What peculiar goal do they strive towards? You sense a protective enchantment that binds its members together. Do you try to dispel it, or leave them be?" And I chose the risky twist, a naive mistake. So Koriko, or Koriko as Cooper saw it, was this bohemian wonderland where the streets were alive with music and art and dancing, just round the clock expression. So I had this occult society be a group of wandering musicians, but their music wasn't performed to entertain, it was performed to charm and deceive people, Pied Piper style, into following them to places unknown for purposes unknown. They were secretive, they were known to disappear just as quickly as they appeared in the first place, with many people refusing to believe that they were even real. This single prompt became everything to my game. Cooper is so intrigued by this group, who I called the Red Staves, that he makes a naive mistake. He makes it his business to investigate them and their activities at every available opportunity. But Cooper is also a kid who has to live in Koriko. He has to sustain himself. And whilst exploring an upscale neighbourhood, Cooper meets Kingsley, an elderly tailor working in a boutique that, like Kingsley, has long since faded from its previous grandeur. Cooper helps out in the shop in return for lodgings in a disused storeroom, and once Kingsley learns of Cooper's magical abilities, they ask him for help deciphering some love letters they've had in their possession for decades, letters that are encrypted by a powerful spell. Cooper, of course, agrees, but this is way beyond his capabilities, so he must spend the year trying to learn how to break the spell. Cooper also does odd jobs for the charismatic and charming Ravi, who runs a wellness retreat in the woods on the outskirts of Koriko. Ravi is the polar opposite of Kingsley. He's young, he's vibrant, well-connected, and influential. Ravi despises the obnoxious clients at his retreat, but has his own ambitions and uses his access to Koriko's elite to maneuver himself politically. Cooper's work is principally based around restoring antiques using his magic, but he also finds himself drawn into Ravi's network, accompanying him on all manner of errands around the city. But as the year progresses, Cooper finally finds his calling, using his magic to help people who have been charmed by the sinister melodies of the Red Staves. He devises a ritual he calls detuning, and the perfect place to do this detuning ritual is in the basement of a dive bar called the Midnight Malady, in one of Koriko's less salubrious districts, where the nightly DIY punk shows weakened the Red Staves' musical power, allowing Cooper to release people from their thrall. The owner of the Midnight Malady, an anarchist activist named Beatrix, drags Cooper reluctantly into the wide-attentioned brewing at the heart of Koriko, confronting injustice, inequality, and the unchecked power of those in charge who have allowed the Red Staves not only to thrive, but also target those most vulnerable. That one moment from the very first card drawn, the Knight of Swords, about an occult society growing in popularity, along with the twist of a naive mistake, sustained the story across all 6 volumes of Cooper's time in Koriko. No other moments mention the occult society or even allude to them, but I was able to use the twists and consequences to tie almost everything back to what the Red Staves were doing and how Cooper was trying to expose or confront them. Koriko has ways and means of empowering players to tell rich and interesting stories through this flexible suite of tools, but there's something else at work here, something more nuanced, and I say that because Cooper's story and my own experience telling it had a somewhat unexpected emotional resonance. The game has a very subtle way of drawing you into the relationships with your confidants through the hangouts. only to put you in a position where you have to make a difficult decision when these relationships reach a fork in the road. Once you have completed 3 hangouts with a confidant, you will be asked to resolve a crossroads prompt should you draw their card again. This will reveal something important they wish to do or a choice they want to make, and you must decide what you want your part in that to be. Now, after I resolved one such crossroads prompt with a confidant of mine, I felt like it gave their part in Cooper's story a satisfying end. I felt like there had been this delicate ebb and flow between us. We learned from each other's experience and helped each other grow. But once the crossroads prompt had been resolved, the text instructed me to remove that confidant's card from my circle and from the game. And I couldn't do it. Each time their card had previously been drawn, I felt reassured that things were going to be okay, or that Cooper was going to learn something important as part of his magical year. But now this card, this one little piece of laminated cardstock, was leaving the game and leaving Cooper's story. And whilst the choice that Cooper made in game was absolutely the best thing for that confidant, neither Cooper nor myself could accept they were gone, and I spent maybe 5 full minutes just looking at the card, thinking that maybe I could just shuffle it back into my circle. I could tear out the entry I'd just written from my journal and draw another card instead. But no, I had to let them go. Conversely, during a particularly challenging volume, some unexpected events saw more cards being added to my deck, which meant that a confidant I desperately needed to call on was not drawn. This specific confidant was someone I sorely needed in that specific moment. I trusted them to be there, and they weren't. Now, I know that this is all of my own making, and it's just that that particular card had been shuffled to the bottom of the deck, but their failure to appear stung. This felt a lot like betrayal. And when it came to the crossroads moment with that confidant, to which there was a risky twist attached, I knocked the dice stack over on purpose. I turned my back on them. They asked me for help, and I refused. The hangout and crossroads prompts for confidants are finite. You won't get to have them with everyone you meet, so the relationships you choose to explore generate moments like this. Moments with genuine emotional weight. And speaking of emotional weight, the letters you write home at the end of each volume really sneak up on you. The letter to your mentor sort of summarizes the events of the preceding volume and is the only thing you'll write that isn't for your eyes only. You have a list of reflective prompts to pick from, but what you actually choose to include in the letter is up to you, and I say choose to include very purposefully here, because deliberately leaving out or glossing over details of your time in Koriko that you don't wish to share is a very real temptation. And in fact, the game positively encourages you to insert little white lies into your letters throughout the game, only to confront you with the consequence of doing so at year's end. Now, did Cooper lie in his letters home? No, of course he didn't. But did he neglect to mention every time he risked his life doing something foolish? Who can say? But yes. Playing Cooper's story through, playing the full magical year, was fascinating and revealing, because even though I was just following the game's rules and procedures, following prompts randomly drawn from the game materials in front of me, the player, Cooper was instantly forced out of his comfort zone, forced to be focused and disciplined, required to be reflective and introspective, put in a position where he had to rely on skills and techniques he wasn't comfortable using. Hey, what the hell? Cooper had spent the year in Koriko, and I had spent 7 weeks writing about it. But we were both pushing ourselves further and further away from our comfort zones. I had pushed further and further into an introspective, reflective exercise, relying on skills and techniques I do not feel comfortable with in order to tell a story of frustrated artistic ambition, the overbearing weight of responsibility, the desire to do the right thing, as well as wrestling with existential questions about purpose and what deeper meaning we give to the relationships with those we choose to share our lives with. And I thought it was just a game about being a witch. Koriko, on its face, is a cozy journaling game about a witch in a magical city, but there is so much more going on here. The sheer volume of moments and confidants, along with the near endless variety that's added by the twists and the consequences, means Koriko is immensely replayable. It's a stellar example of a genre of solo game I was reluctant to explore before, and after this magical year, I guess we now know why. But I will always have this, the material reminder of Cooper's year in Koriko and my 7 weeks out of my comfort zone. And I feel like I've strung you along long enough without showing you my journal. So let's get into it. Like I said, Cooper saw himself as an artist, so I wanted to reflect his story through art. But I am a lousy artist. I cannot draw or paint. I'm incapable of transferring what's in here onto a page visually. I can barely do it with words, so through art I've got no chance. But I wanted to try. So I used collage. I used bits of newspaper and magazines at first, and then I started digging around for public domain art, and I printed off a ton of maps and illustrations and paintings and chopped them up and stuck them in, added some colour in places, and I think it worked really well and looks pretty cool. If you want a closer look at my journal and a far more detailed breakdown of Cooper's story, then over on my Patreon, I have a commentary video where I go through the story volume by volume and I talk through the prompts, the confidants, and also reveal what Cooper's choice was at year's end. If you want to get hold of a copy of Koriko, then you'll find all the links in the down below, and I heartily recommend you do try and get a copy of this glorious boxed version, which comes with the book, a custom tarot deck, and all the dice in this lovely little bag. Top marks all round for the presentation on this one, Mousehole. No notes. Thanks to all my delightful patrons for supporting the channel and supporting what I do. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you, thank you, thank you, a million times thank you. I'll be back next time, but until then, it is farewell and safe passage.